So to do this cute little dandelion piece, which is a really popular design, I'm using a 5-round liner, and I'm going in first of all for my outline with solid dynamic black ink. I have my stroke on a 3.9 and I have my voltage on 8 volts. This tends to work well for me due to my hand speed. So when it comes to your stroke and voltage, do adjust and play according to what your hand pressure and your hand speed is like. So the important thing about this piece, even though it's small and it's delicate, it's still all about contrast. It's also important when it comes to the stenciling of a piece like this that you don't overcomplicate it. Some of the stencils and the designs out there do mean that the dandelion pieces are really close together. Now, this makes for great artwork, but it doesn't necessarily translate well into a great tattoo. So just make sure when you are doing the individual stalks of the dandelion head that they are nice and clear, nice and concise, and then you can give the illusion of a fuller dandelion head with your shading and your grey wash afterwards. So I'm just going in and I'm just getting the stalks of each dandelion head in with my neat black, and then the contrast, as I mentioned, will come when I do the fluffy parts to the dandelion. Make sure as well that you can see what you're doing. So when I'm doing a piece, I tend to like to dab instead of wipe. But if something is becoming quite smudged, as you can see here, I will try to wipe away the excess without too much green soap so that I can just see where my lines are underneath. And I don't have to fully rub the whole thing off and take off the rest of the stencil if I haven't got certain pieces in. So by dabbing and lightly wiping, I can still see what's underneath and where I need to go over. So you can see parts of the dandelion head here that are floating away. They are actually really simple. They're just like a 3-pronged fork, and that's the simple structure of the head, and that's what I've been doing below to the main dandelion head. So by getting these in, that's the skeleton, if you like, in solid black, and then I will add some shading and some grey wash just to make sure that they look fluffy and that they also have a bit more of a 3D feel to them. So you can see at the moment it's looking very simplistic. Now the middle of the dandelion is just a circular middle. Now with most dandelion heads like this, you'll see that it's quite pitted. So I'm just doing a little bit of shading just by using some dot work. And then I'm also crisping up my main stalk and thickening it up a tiny bit before I move over to using my 3-round liner just to go in and to get some more detail. My biggest tip really is to be patient. When it comes to fine line designs or smaller delicate pieces, then as you're building up the design, don't be tempted to rush the piece. Sometimes when you see it at this stage, when it's still very much a basic skeleton, you can lose hope. But just be patient with it and just know that the more you build it up, the more depth and the more definition that you're going to get. Another little tip is to know when to stop with a piece like this, especially when it comes to fine line. The more simplistic it is, the more effective the design. So it's very tempting to keep going, especially when you're shading and you're trying to build up some more depth and some contrast. But knowing when to stop and when to walk away is crucial to a simple design such as this. So here I'm just building up on the main dandelion head, the fluffy bit. So above the main 3-pronged fork, you can see I am just using a light grey wash to go in and to give a little bit more depth to create that fluffy look that we get from the dandelion heads as they blow off into the wind. So I'm just building up my grey wash with my 3-round liner. I'm just doing very small stipple effects back and forwards just to build it up nice and lightly. What I don't want to happen is I don't want to go too dark. So by gradually building up this lighter grey wash, it just means I feel like I have a bit more control. This technique also works well for my particular hand pressure. I am slightly lighter with how I work, which is why my machine stroke is higher, and also I do have my voltage up slightly more. And that is, like I say, to counteract the lightness of my hand weight. If you find that your pressure is a lot firmer, then again counteract that with your machine. So you may wish to turn your voltage down, and also depending on the design that you're doing, you may very well wish to turn your stroke down. Especially when it comes to shading, we tend to have a much lower stroke to create a softer look. For those of you who don't have machines where you can adjust the stroke, most of these machines will probably be on a stroke of about 3.5, if not 3.6, which is optimum for both shading and lining, but for these smaller pieces. So stretch is key for this, not only for yourself and being able to get good ink retention, but also for your client's pain threshold. Now I'm doing this at the bottom of the ankle, so the skin is already quite nice and taut, but I am using my 3-finger stretch in order to make sure that I get a good vibration and that I'm getting into the skin at the optimum depth into the dermis. Body placement is really important for these small designs. It's important for any tattoo design, but I particularly think with tiny tattoos and fine line designs, you tend to find that actually if the tattoo is not placed correctly, then it will stick out like a sore thumb. So my client had this on her left side ankle, which meant that I needed the design to face inwards towards her body. Now we had an area of hyperpigmentation, as you can probably see on the video. Now this doesn't look like a mole, but we certainly didn't want to go over the area. So I just made sure that this design neatly fit around the area whilst also curving around and fitting to her muscle structure. And this is really important so that it looks correct when she stands up, that it flows nicely, but also in the future, if my client decided that she wanted to expand with her designs, it gives plenty of room for either myself or another artist to work with the design and to wrap other designs around it as well. So now I'm using white after my grey wash. I have changed my needle because I don't want any colour contamination. So my white is to really contrast, especially against the dark black that I've used. This will make the piece stand out, and it really should pop after putting the white in. So If you're doing a tiny tattoo, if you're doing fine line designs, don't be afraid to add in your contrast. One of the best contrasts against black is, of course, white. So I try not to overuse my white. I just make sure that it's in the areas where the light would hit and it becomes a lovely highlight. For me, this does help to make the piece go from a two-dimensional piece to a three-dimensional piece. And that can be the difference for you as an artist when it comes to doing fine line and tiny tattoo designs. It could just be that you need to add a little bit more contrast in order to make your work stand out. But that really does depend on the style that you're doing. This, particular piece is popular just as a silhouette design as well. So you may just find that your clients are asking for a much more simplistic outline design, and that's all they want. And if so, again, your line work will be extremely important for that, with the accuracy and also the depth, and your body placement as well will be really important, just to ensure that that piece flows nicely. Because once again, just because it's more simplistic in design doesn't necessarily mean that it's easier to do. In fact, like I mentioned before, there's not so many places to hide with just a fine line simple silhouette tattoo. So when you're working with white, just be mindful it can cause more bleeding. And so what I tend to do is, if I can't see that white come through straight away, I will allow the skin a little bit of time just to calm down. You can always apply some green soap to a kitchen towel and just place it over the area if your client has bled a lot, or if they're swelling quite a bit with the addition of white. And then I tend to go back over any areas that I feel haven't yet taken, or perhaps the blood has pushed out. Here I am just very, very quickly touching up just some darker areas of contrast. So I've switched my needle back over again, and then I will, for the very last time, switch back over to my white and just put that in, just to ensure that I'm happy with the piece. So do send over some pics of any dandelion tattoos that you've done. It'd be amazing to see whether you prefer to stick to the more silhouetted designs, or whether you have tried to build up to a little bit more of a 3D design, or even go for total realistic. It'd be awesome to see what you've come up with and what you've created. Hope you've enjoyed the video. Please remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel.